today's webinar is going to cover the ins and outs of completing a Chapter 105 general permit. So hopefully that's the webinar you all signed up for and are expected to participate in. I'm going to go ahead and respect all y'all time and go ahead and get started. So first off, my name is Maureen Copeland. I'm a resource conservationist at the Allegheny County Conservation District, ACCD for short. One of my roles is reviewing the Chapter 105 permits. So my hope is that today provides a little bit more insight into what us as the reviewers are looking for and what we need to approve, what we need in order to approve a permit to make everything more efficient and easier for everyone. Also with us today is Amy Miller, the Watershed Program Lead at ACCD, who's also reviewed her share of 105 permits for the district. She's going to be on hand today to help with questions and technical assistance. We will have a Q&A at the end as time allows, and Amy will be keeping an eye on the chat feature. If you have questions as we're going along, feel free to drop it in the chat. The button to get in the chat may differ depending on what kind of device you're on. Often it's right down there at the bottom of your screen. But if you're on a mobile device, you'd have to hit like 3 buttons and be able to get into the chat. So I'm gonna go ahead and put something in the chat so everyone can see that. So yeah, as we're going along, feel free to ask questions through the chat feature there, and we'll hopefully be able to answer them at the end. If there's more questions than I have time for, I will go ahead and answer them later and email out questions and answers to the emails that everyone registered with. So as a heads up, this presentation today is not going to go over the why of Chapter 105. You can get more information about ACCD's role in Chapter 105 and the goals and objectives of the regulations in a previous webinar presented by one of my colleagues. There's a URL on the screen right there that you can get to the page where you can find the Intro to Chapter 105 webinar. While you're on that page, be sure to check out other webinars and fact sheets that we hope are useful and informative, and check back often as the staff at ACCD is adding more items regularly. Instead, what we'll be doing today is spending some time reviewing what you can do under Chapter 105 General Permit, what you cannot do, and go through those items needed in your permit application. As mentioned, I will then be able to take questions at the end should everything not be exactly perfectly crystal clear. Of course, I do this all with the caveat that DEP, or the Department of Environmental Protection's instructions and FAQ, frequently asked question sheets, are really what you need to be looking at when completing an application. This presentation today is simply meant to supplement those regulatory documents. So agenda item 1, what you can do under Chapter 105 General Permit. Listed here on the screen are activities that you can do under a general permit. And a key thing to understand, any general permits, whether it be for Chapter 105 or for another chapter, is intended to make things more efficient in the permitting. The idea is that you have a group of activities that are all similar. They need to fit into a set of conditions. And if these activities can meet those conditions, then they can apply for these general permits. With those similar activities, there are certain requirements of the permit holders during the permit activities. If the activity cannot meet the set of conditions, they would need to apply for an individual permit. So for example, if you have a fish habitat enhancement structure that you want to build, you would look to see if all of your proposed activities comply with the conditions of the General Permit 1 Fish Habitat Enhancement Structures. If so, you can apply for the more streamlined general permit. If it's a bigger or a fancier fish habitat structure, doesn't meet all of the requirements, you would apply for an individual permit. So these activities that are on the screen are the 9 that ACCD reviews of general permits. So general permit 1, as I said, is fish habitat enhancement structures. General Permit 2 or GP2 is small docks and boat launching ramps. GP3 is for bank rehabilitation, bank protection, gravel bar removal. GP4 is for intake and outfall structures. GP5, utility line stream crossings. GP6 is for agricultural crossings and ramps. GP7 is minor road crossings. And GP8, temporary road crossings. GP9 is agricultural activities. And I'm seeing that we're having some technical issues. And let me see if I can work on that. Is that better? Great, I will move my chat box and make it. Sorry about that, everyone. Okay, so these are the 9 GPs. There are a few other general permits in the 105 world that ACCD does not review. Rather, Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection does. These are the GP10, which is abandoned mine reclamation, GP11, maintenance, testing, repair, rehabilitation, or replacement of water obstructions and encroachments, and GP15, which is private residential construction in wetlands. In our office, we tend to see a lot of GP3s, 4s, and 5s, but no matter what the permit is, all of them are going to go through the same general process to get approved. So going on to agenda item number 2, what can you not do under a general permit? Each of the general permits will have their own conditions that need to be followed. And they can be all found in the same general place, DEP's eLibrary. There is a URL for that library on the screen there. It took me some time to figure out how to navigate through here, but once you figure it out, it's really helpful. So you go to the eLibrary to get to the 105 documents. It's permits, authorizations, and packages. All 105 lives in the Waterways Engineering and Wetlands Department. So you click on that, click on General Permit, select the general permit that you want, and then Permit Package is where I go to find all the conditions. Alternatively, you can get to the same place by going to accdpa.org, hovering over our Programs tab and clicking on the Chapter 105 Permit Types and Resources. So whatever way is easiest for you, both paths will lead to the same information. So in this instruction or in the permit package document, you want to go to part 1 and you want to go to B. Obviously, you want to read the whole thing to make sure that you understand it all, but for the conditions itself, go to that area. And this section B is sites and conditions where this general permit does not apply. If your project hits one of those bullets, you cannot apply for a general permit. Many of these sites and many of the conditions are similar through each of the GPs. For example, many of them restrict activities for national landmark sites. But there are some unique conditions within each GP, so make sure you choose the one specific for the activity that you want to do. Sorry, computer freezing, hold up. Once you go through part B, you'll scroll down through part D, which is project design and construction criteria. These are additional criteria to be sure to meet. For example, if you're building fish habitat structure and your project will not constrict the stream, which is condition 3, the structure will not extend more than 3 feet above normal stream bed, condition 4, you may be able to apply for general permit. Some of the conditions in part D are design related, so they're things you'll have to be able to show during the permit application phase. Others, such as number 5, are construction related. If you find any artifacts during work, you'll need to report to the Bureau of Historic Preservation. So it's crucial that everyone involved with the project, the landowner, the designer, the construction crew, are all aware of these conditions. All right, so now that you've determined that your project can apply for a general permit, we're going to actually walk through the permit application process, see what you'll need. Again, your main source of information should be DEP instructions. Read them carefully and reference them often. You'll find all the forms and all the instructions you'll need on DEP's eLibrary. Again, the URL is there for reference, or from accdpa.org's website. We'll walk through a lot of these items in more detail through the rest of this webinar, but what you'll need to submit is the general permit registration form, which includes a fee calculator worksheet and aquatic resource impact table. And those are the main forms. And then the things you'll attach to the application are project description, site plan details, ENS control plan, PNDI search, wetland delineation, location map, and for GP3 and GP11, photos are required. Technically, you'll also have to submit a bog turtle habitat screening. This is a requirement for all 105 permits. However, bog turtles do not live in Allegheny County, so this is not something that we see while we're reviewing permits. If you're applying for a permit in a different county, please be sure to check about the habitat of bog turtles. They are a federally threatened species, so we want to protect them as well as we can. In terms of the first item on this list, the general permit registration form, there's a screenshot there of what the form looks like. It's a basic form. It asks about permittee information, consultant information, site conditions, other relevant information, and signatures. Included with the form, like I said, is the fee worksheet, a checklist, and aquatic resource impact table. We'll get to those later. The form itself is fairly straightforward, but please read the instructions as you're filling it out. It will make the process go a lot smoother. So this is the fee worksheet that I mentioned, partially screenshotted on the screen there. So what you'll do is you'll go through and you'll check the general permit that you're applying for. If you have multiple general permits, you'll check all of them on this screen, this sheet here. You'll really want to pay close attention to how the permits are paid for. Some of them are going to be per project, such as 9 and 10. Others are going to be per structure or per crossing. So pay attention to that to make sure you have the fee right. The instructions provide information on who and where to send applications and payments. Right now, especially, it's not a bad idea to check in with that agency in case there's some different stipulations. Just for example, ACCD right now is working remotely and not accepting or receiving mail as regularly. So we are requesting payment and applications in electronic forms. So just check in, make sure you're on the same page with everyone else. Some other key pieces of info to note on this form. Federal, state, county, and municipal authorities are exempt from paying for a GP, so make sure you check that box if that applies to you. Also on this page, there's a note to remind you to notify your county and municipal authorities of this project. So don't forget to check in with these agencies, provide them with information and any necessary forms they need so that they're well aware of what's happening. All right, so this form here is the aquatic resource impact table. This is an important table. This is what helps us, and as we send it along to the state level, helps the state keep an eye on critical data such as how many streams we're crossing, how large the streams and structures, or how many wetlands are being disturbed. So it's really important that this table gets filled out correctly. And please read the instructions to fill this out. Not entirely intuitive, but I'll try to go through a few of those points now. So the first 3 rows, obviously it says DP use only. That is not for the applicant to fill out. We'll fill that out as we're going along and put in permit number and crossing number. So the first row that the applicant or the consultant is to fill out is the fee, which you should now know since you filled out the fee worksheet. You're gonna then fill out this structure activity unique identifier. This is something that you're gonna create. Oftentimes it will be GP5, for example, if you're doing a utility crossing, GP5 and 1 for the first crossing. If you only have one crossing, you might only have to fill out one row of this table. But if you have multiple GPs or multiple crossings, then you're going to have to fill out multiple rows there. So yeah, next you'll going to identify the aquatic resource type. This is definitely where you want to see the instructions. There's different options for streams versus wetlands. For example, streams are perennial or they're temporary, intermittent. And that's the same for floodways. However, wetlands could be identified as freshwater emergent. And so that's what that PEM there stands for. And those acronyms and what they stand for are listed in the instructions. Others are freshwater shrub, freshwater forested, or open land wetland. And each of those different types of wetlands have their own 3-digit code that tells you what they are. So again, check the instructions. The next two are latitude and longitude, pretty straightforward. As is the name of the waterway, so whatever the creek or the stream that you're going to be crossing or going under or over is going to be listed here. The Chapter 93 designation applies to that stream. If you need help finding it, PADEP EMAP website is a really useful tool. You can zoom into the area you're working and click on the stream and find out what the Chapter 93 designation is. The next column asks for type of work proposed. Some examples might be if you're excavating or you're placing fill, or if you're doing horizontal boring. This can be, want to keep it short, not a lot of space, but you can explain what you're doing in that column. And then you're going to tell us whether it's a temporary or permanent activity or structure. So that goes there. And then these last three, these are going to tell us how much impact there's going to be. If you're working in a stream and its floodway, you might fill out this first two columns, and you might put an NA here in the wetlands if you're not touching any wetlands. And vice versa, if you're only touching a wetland, you might only fill out that last column there and put NA in the first two. Since you're applying for a Chapter 105 permit, you're going to be impacting either a water course, a floodway, or a wetland. So this table, these last three columns should never be in completely NA. Something is going to be impacted here, and we want to know what that is. So that's where you're going to fill out the last three. This sometimes, applicants will fill out wetland here and water names, and that's fine. Sometimes, you have water course and floodway, and they broke this out into two different rows. I have seen it all in one row, and I don't know about every reviewer, but that makes sense in my head, so that's fine too. But this is really critical table, so make sure you take your time and fill this out correctly. So those are the forms, the last three items we talked about, and then everything here on out is just things you're going to add to your application to show us that this project can apply for a general permit, and do so in a way that protects the health and of the stream or wetland. So this next item is site plan and details. You're going to show us what you're doing overall for this project, and in it, be sure to show us the items related to Chapter 105. So if you're doing a stream crossing, we want to see that stream crossing in your plan drawings. You're going to show us details, so if you need to give us elevations or any special notes needed for those details. Many standard details are going to be found in DEP's Erosion and Sedimentation Best Management Practice Manual. So feel free to reference that as needed. Remember to keep an eye while you're doing this on your GP conditions. For example, if you're doing a stream crossing and you can only have up to a 48-inch pipe crossing the stream, show me that your pipe size is 48 inches or smaller. That's one of the conditions I want to be able to say, yeah, this project is meeting all the conditions that I can see. So show that to me. If you're putting in a small dock, be sure to show the size of the dock, because that's one of the permit conditions. As a reviewer, I won't know if it can be approved if I don't know the size. So yeah, you're going to prove to me that this is something that can be approved by a general permit. Some of the items to put on the plan drawing are shown here on the screen. You know, stream name, the limits of the stream, the wetlands, anything else to give reference to where we are, buildings, utilities. So that's all going to go on your plan drawing. And remember that structure activity or structure activity ID that you created for your aquatic resource impact table. You want to use that ID on the plan drawings to label the structure. So if you did a GP51 for a stream crossing, make sure to label that crossing in the plan drawing as that number, GP51. That helps us keep everything straight if it gets to be a very complicated permit. All right, so next item, and this is, if I see an applicant struggling with a 105 application, it's gonna be most of the time on this item. All Chapter 105 permits must have an erosion and sediment control plan, shorten it for ENS plan. And you're gonna wanna submit that ENS plan with your 105 application. ENS plans are spelled out in Chapter 102 regulations. And so what is Chapter 102? Chapter 102 regulates stormwater discharge associated with construction. So one thing to think about, sometimes, not often, but sometimes the 105 application and the ENS plan could be reviewed by different people. So because of these instances, it's best if your ENS plan and narrative is submitted, you know, when in the days of paper copies, it was stapled all together and then submitted with your 105 application, but not all stapled together. Since we are digital right now, that is, you know, a little bit not as important, but if you're putting together PDF documents, maybe keeping the ENS plan and narrative separate from the 105 application documents could be helpful. Not a big deal, but something to keep in mind. All right, so what you want to include in this ENS plan and narrative is spelled out in Chapter 102.4, subsection B5. Right there is where the regulation tells you exactly what you need, which unfortunately is a little long and lengthy. This is paraphrased and condensed. Apologies for the small font. But yeah, this is what is required. If you really look at it, you start putting things on your plan and on your narrative, it's not all that much, but just let's talk through some of these. So let's say, for example, key point, Roman numeral 6. It says narrative description of location and types of perimeter and on-site BMPs, best management practices. So what are you going to do to keep everything from all your soil from your construction project on site and not going into the stream? Some compost filter socks are commonly used. Cofferdam, maybe to keep the water from the stream out of your construction site while you're working. We want to know what those are that you're going to be using. And DEP, like I said, has the ENS BMP manual that describes many of these BMPs and how to install them. So if you have questions on how best to keep sediment from coming off your site and into the stream, it's a good idea to start with that manual there. Let's see, Roman numeral 9 says you want a plan drawing. And those plan drawings, should include topographic features, should include surface water that are on your site. It's going to include a construction sequence, what order the contractor is going to be doing the work, and important things on that note. Oftentimes we'll get a plan and a narrative to cover all these items, so don't feel that every little detail has to go on the plan drawing. Feel free to describe some of these items in paragraph form as a narrative. So sometimes we'll receive a narrative that's going to talk about, geological formations on site, and potential thermal impacts on to the surface waters, and write that out in a paragraph rather than try to cram everything into a plan drawing. So keep in mind though, one little caveat, if your project as a whole is over an acre, that kind of puts you into a different category and you may need an NPDES permit in addition to Chapter 105 permits. And if you do need an NPDES permit, you will need all of these items listed on the screen, but you also need to check on the instructions for that permit application. And there are some differences in those two permit processes. So what I just said here about, narrative and plan for 105 may not hold true for an NPDES permit. Just a caveat there. So, all right, you've got a plan drawing, you've got a ENS control. Hopefully you've already done a PNDI search. This is something you should probably do prior to putting together all the applications material. But this is something that you will want to include with your application. So a PNDI search, PNDI stands for Pennsylvania Natural Diversity Index. It's a tool that helps you plan around endangered or threatened species. In all 105 general permits must submit a search receipt with their application. And to help out with that, PNDI searches are completed on this website here, naturalheritage.state.pa.us. And you go to that website, you actually have to create a login and a password to use the site. I believe each search is $40 to do. So a little bit of stuff you need to know ahead of time to be able to do the search. But some items to remember, typically the searches are good for 2 years. So if you do a search early in planning stages, which you should to help know if you have to do certain things to avoid endangered species, if you end up taking more than 2 years planning, you might have to redo the search. When you are in the Natural Heritage website, you're going to be drawing boundaries for this project. And you want to include the entire boundary, entire area that you'll be working in. If you submit us a receipt and the area is smaller than your actual project area, very well you could be asked to redo the search. We want to make sure that, every little area that you're going to disturb is included. And then finally, make sure you sign the receipt. It's important. You can see on the screen that there's a couple ways that these searches can come back. You can get no impact, meaning there's no known federally endangered or threatened species in the area, which is good. Sometimes you'll get a response that says conservation measure, which will then list some items that should be followed during constructions. And you'll want to make sure you incorporate those conservation measures into your plan. Sometimes you'll see you can only cut trees during certain months, or you can only work during certain months to avoid, different nesting habitats, stuff like that. So pay attention to that. Another response you can receive is avoidance measure, and this is similar to conservation measures, but you'll be asked to sign off on those. And then lastly, you can receive clearance letters from jurisdictional agencies. And if that's the case, you must include that with your application as well. We need to see that the agencies have signed off on this project and you're good to go. So make sure to include that if that comes back as if you get a clearance letter. So now, as general permits are projects in streams and wetlands, it's likely that many applications for GPs will include a wetland delineation or determination. If the project area includes a wetland delineation must be included in the application package. If there's no wetland, it's not a bad idea to include photos and show other evidence as a wetland determination to show us, hey, there's no wetlands here and we've done our research and this is what we see. Just to show us that you're keeping an eye on that and covering all your bases. But yeah, this is something that you're going to want to include in your application. All right, so this last piece here is photos. They are required for GP3, stream bank stabilization, gravel bar removal. They're also required for GP11, which ACCD does not review, but they are not required for all those other general permits. But if they help show the site or the need for GP, feel free to include them with your permit application. The instructions for GP3 and GP11 provide specific requirements for these photos, like how to label them and whatnot. So be sure to check that out. One nice feature I've seen in several applications is a photo map, so that you can see like where these photos were taken in reference to the project itself. It helps the reviewer really get a feel for the site. Remember that we don't necessarily know this area, so anything you can do to help us understand the area better is a bonus and will make everyone's job easier, and we definitely appreciate that. So, not required, so you won't get penalized if you don't submit it if you have anything besides a GP3 or a GP11. So now that you know that what is required in a Chapter 105 application, and you know where to find out whether or not your project is eligible for a GP, general permit, I want to bring back, take a step back for the reason for it all. The purpose of 105 is to protect natural resources, protect the water quality of our streams and our waterways. The pieces of this application are designed to help us ensure clean water. Good planning, good design during these application phases go a long way to ensure that construction and maintenance of these structures and activities are done well and that we can protect the streams and wetlands of our region. So I always find it helpful to keep that in mind as we go through these application processes. Sometimes what we ask for might seem a little not necessary, but everyone's trying to protect what we can. And again, I hope that this webinar provided some insight and that you have no more questions about what is needed to apply for a Chapter 105 permit. But I realize once you actually start working on an application that there's questions that could come up. So 3 locations for resources that I would suggest. First, accdpa.org. This is our website. If you hover over the heading, our programs, you'll be able to click on Soils, Chapter 105. There's resources there. In fact, all of our Chapter 105 website has resources, so check it out. And as mentioned, DEP's eLibrary has relevant forms, instructions for your application. And once you learn how it's organized, it's not too hard to figure it out. So remember, permits, 105 is in waterway engineering and wetlands, and general permits are a tab there. And lastly, if you're still stuck, you can give ACCD a call, either talk through a question, or we do schedule pre-application meetings. We are doing all those via Zoom right now, but they're still available. If you need to talk about your project and get advice on how best to go about it. So we are here to help. And if you're still stuck, DEP's office can be a source of assistance as well. So thanks for coming out today. Remember to check out this and other webinars on our website. Also, as something that you all might be interested in, on Monday at 1 p.m., my colleague will be doing a webinar on common deficiencies of Chapter 105. It will be a good chance to dive a little bit deeper into this topic and maybe answer some more of those questions you might have. So with that, I am going to apparently stop sharing my screen, which I didn't mean to, but go ahead and be able to turn it over to Amy and see if there's any questions that I or Amy can answer.
Thanks, Mo. We have a couple questions in the chat box. Does ACCD review GP5s when horizontal directional drilling technology is used?
Yeah, so a GP5 is a utility line crossing, and oftentimes those are getting replaced by horizontal drilling. I have not done any of those, but that is something that if it's a GP5, it's still you can be sending it to our office. There is some technology that we're learning, and we'll often refer to DEP's guidance on this. But yes, definitely send those to our office.
Okay. Since the narrative component is largely replaced by the new permit for NPDES, should a separate narrative be completed for the 105 permit when an NPDES is required?
Oh, good question. No. So basically, the narrative for 105 is your chance to expand on things that need to be expanded. Since the NPDES permit has the modules, a lot of those items would already be explained in there, so you don't need to double up on the work when you're doing both the NPDES and a 105. So just feel free to do the NPDES as you would, and make sure you have the 105 drawings and details included in the application package. Good question.
Okay, I mean, that's all the questions that are in the chat box. So unless anybody has anything else quickly.
Cool. Well, thank you all. Let me see if I can, real quick, my information is on the screen here. If anyone has any questions as you're going along, feel free to reach out to me via email, or you can call our office. But I appreciate you all taking the time today to hang out and learn a little bit more, and enjoy your weekend.